Okay, welcome everyone, and this is my first video tutorial, and in this video tutorial I'm going to show you how to set up your project between Maya and Unity so that we can make an interactive 3D project. So first of all, what you're going to need is Unity. Go to the Unity website and go to Get Unity, and you just need the free version, so you can get that here. You're also going to need Maya, and if you're one of my students, you'll be able to create an account here at Autodesk, the Autodesk Education website, and get a free version of Maya. So just take some time to do that for your computers at home. Otherwise, if you're following this tutorial in one of my classrooms, that'll all be set up on the computer for you. So we're going to start with Maya, but first I'm going to tell you how Maya will sort of integrate that with Unity. So you're going to want to start up Unity, and you're going to have to log in, and then we're going to create a new project. So we're going to go to the New Project button here. We're going to store it on the disk. So you're going to go New, and I'm going to create a folder on my desktop here called Tutorial Project, and I'm going to select that one, select that folder. I'm going to call it Tutorial Project. I want to use the 3D assets, so I'm going to hit 3D, and then I'm going to go Create, and it will set up a project for me. We're just waiting for it to do that. It'll take a little second. Oh, here it is. And you can see while that's setting up that it's actually created this folder on my desktop called Tutorial Project. And so, like a video project, when you create a project in Unity, it doesn't create one file, it creates a whole file structure, a whole folder structure. So the whole project is contained in here. It's building a whole set of folders for us, and for the time being we're mostly going to be concerned with the assets folder. This is where we're going to put all of the stuff we make that we're going to put into our interactive project. So that's important for the time being. And here is the Unity project window itself. And as you can see down here, we'll get to these windows in a later video, but you can see here this assets folder in our projects window is the same folder that's on your file structure in your Explorer, and that's the assets folder here. So if we can access this folder two different ways, we can go through the folder in the Explorer, or we can go into the folder here in the project itself. So anything that we create, any 3D models we're making in Maya, we're going to save into our assets folder here. Okay? Well, what I want you to do is right click here into the assets folder and create a new subfolder, and we're going to call it Meshes. It's going to be our first kind of content folder for our project, so we're going to save all of our 3D models. And if you're following this along, you'll notice that when I right click there should be a little indicator down here in the lower corner of the screen that tells you what mouse buttons I've just pressed, as well as any of the keys I'm pressing on the keyboard. So, that's all we need to do with Unity for the moment. Now we're going to go over to Maya, so just start Maya up, and we should have a blank screen. Now, we can also save Maya projects, but I'm not going to do that. I'm not going to set up a whole project. I'm going to be working on discrete kind of models that we're going to save into Unity. But just as an introduction to Maya here, first of all, just how to control the view space. So you're opening up onto this perspective grid here, and to move around this grid, we press Alt, hold Alt on the keyboard, we left click with the mouse, and now we can rotate our view around by dragging the mouse. We can also use the mouse wheel to zoom in and out, and I highly advise that you use a mouse that has a mouse wheel rather than your trackpad or a tablet, because it's much easier to model using a regular mouse with a wheel. Okay. We can also hold Alt and click the mouse wheel and drag to move around like so, and that's sort of our basic moving around tools. What I'm going to do is we're going to go up to Create Polygon Primitive. We're going to create a cube, and now we can see that we can view this object in perspective from many different angles by just using our simple camera controls there. Another important camera control is, say we moved to a weird place on the screen, we can't find our object. As long as it's still selected, we can press F, and it will F for focus will snap the view back onto whatever we've selected. So F for focus, like that. Something else we can do, say you've gone off screen, you've got the object off screen, you've unclicked it, so it's not selected anymore. We can go to Windows, we can go to Hypergraph Hierarchy, we can also go to Outliner, but we'll do the Hypergraph Hierarchy. This is a representation of everything that is in our scene in a kind of a hierarchy view. So if I've lost that cube and I want to find it again, I can see that it's in here. I can select that this way, so now I've got the cube selected. If I go back into my window, I can press F to focus. Or, I think what happened there is I didn't actually select it, and if I press F to focus, it will snap to whatever, like to looking at whatever's in the scene overall. So I can either select that there and hit F, or I can just hit F to see, kind of contain within the camera view everything that's in my scene. Okay, so that's the basic camera controls. I'm going to close the hypergraph for the moment. I don't really need it. And now we're going to go through some very basic manipulation tools. First of all, when we are creating a new sculpture, a new object, there's something important that we need to think about, and that's the coordinates of the object and how it's set up. So when we create a new object, it appears at the coordinates 0, 0, 0, and you can see up here in the side we've got some things called translate X, translate Y, translate Z, X, etc. These are referring to the coordinates of the object. The translation basically means the position. So if you remember maths from high school, It's at 0 on the x-axis, 0 on the y-axis, and 0 on the z-axis. And you can see a little representation down in the bottom of the screen that shows you which way those coordinates point. So positive y is up, positive z is forwards, and positive x is sideways. Positive and negative x are sideways. And as a general convention, we want to always have our z-axis forward. So if I'm looking at this cube this way, I've rotated it so that it's pointing along the positive z, and you can see down in this little representation the z's pointing forwards. So that way, this face here is pointing forwards when we're sculpting. So if I was creating a person, I would want their face to be going this way, pointing this way. Alright? So, now let's look at some simple manipulation tools to change that around. So, the X, Y, Z, translate, rotation and scale refers to the transform data. That's the transform data, and that's going to be important when we go into Unity, because if I have a 3D object here, don't worry about this for the moment, but you can see this is up here called the transform data, the position, the rotation and the scale. We're going to use scripts later to manipulate those. So the position, the rotation and the scale are here, except here it's called translation rather than position. And we can manipulate those three different things, and a lot of the time in working with 3D, everything comes in threes. So there's the three things we can manipulate along the three different axes. First of all, a very important button, there's three important buttons here, is W. W on the keyboard is the shortcut for the translation tool, and you see if I press W while having the object selected, I click on the object to select it, we have three arrows to move the object along the different axes. So if I pull the blue arrow, it moves along the Z, and you can see that Z changing there. If we move along the X, it changes the X translation, and the same for the Y. If I want to reset that, I can just type manually into these boxes 0, 0, 0. Okay? The second shortcut, so we just had W for translate. The second shortcut is E. E for rotation. Okay? And another thing I'm often doing here is pressing Control Z, just to undo changes. Control Z is very important. My fingers are constantly pressing Control Z as part of the workflow. You'll be doing that very, very, very often, all the time, while making little changes. Oops, maybe you went too high. Control Z. All right. So E to rotate, and you can click each of these different coloured parts of the cube just to rotate on one axis only. Undo, undo. And the third one is R. R to scale. You can scale along the different axes, and you see the change here in the same way. So that's W, E and R. Very important point with each of those tools. Whenever you're translating, only translate on one arrow at a time. Don't pull it from the middle. Why? Mostly because we're looking at the object from a 2D representation. Except if we're moving from all of the axes at the same time, we're moving it in 3D. So I might be pushing this object further back than I can actually see, and that makes things very confusing. So we only want to move it on one arrow at a time, never more. Well, that's my rule anyway for when I'm sculpting. Same with rotation, only do one axis at a time rather than just randomly rotating it. And for R, it's the opposite. You usually only go uniformly from the center rather than pulling these unless you want to distort it in a strange way. So just go from the center out. And you see that when you do it that way, the scale is always the same on all of the different axes. Okay, so that's W, E, and R for the three main transform manipulations. So the next thing we want to do is we want to know how to manipulate individual parts of the cube rather than the whole object itself. So at the moment we've only been working in something called object mode, and that's what happens when we select the whole object and we make transformations to the whole object. I'm just going to switch over to Google Docs here. And so we've got the transform data, which is position or translation, rotation, and scale. We've got our transform tools. We've got W for translate. We've got E for rotation. And we've got R for scale. Now we have another set of threes, and we've got the kind of individual components, let's call them, or don't know what else to call them, of a mesh. And these are going to be three things: vertices, edges, and faces. And we can use these three tools on each of these three elements of an overall object. So we can use these three on a whole object, or we can use it on the individual vertices, edges, and faces. So if you remember back to when you first started learning design, there are three basic elements of a picture, and they are points, lines, and shapes. And if you think about it in 3D, we're kind of constructing each of these three-dimensional forms out of points, lines, and shapes. The points we call vertices, the lines we call edges, and the shapes we call faces. So, to move from object mode into selecting each of those individual components, you're going to right-click on the mouse until a wheel comes up like this. And you can see you can select edges, vertices, and faces, object mode. And there's a couple of other options here that you don't need to worry about. Let's select vertex first. Vertex is singular for vertices. And now you can see you can select one vertex at a time. And for each vertex we can use our simple transform tools, W, E, or R, to move those vertices around. You can also use the rotate tool, although it doesn't really work for vertices. That will change something, but you just can't see the change, so I recommend you don't rotate them. You can also scale them, but you can't really do that to a single vertex. You can, however, say if you box select two vertices, you can scale them together, and you can also rotate them together, or move them together. So that's create a weird shape. You can also hold down your right click to get your edges, and you can move or rotate or scale a whole edge like that. Same for faces. We can scale, we can rotate, or we can translate the face. And that's going to be the end of this first introductory tutorial to the basic tools. But before I finish, I'm just going to show you how to save this object out and how you would use it in Unity. You just select the whole object. We're going to go File. You can either use this Send to Unity function. I don't use it. I'm just used to doing it this way. I just go Export Selection. I'm going to go to my folder on the desktop, the tutorial project, Assets, Meshes, and I'm not going to save it as a Maya binary. I'm going to save it as an FBX export. You want FBX or OBJ mostly. Well, that's what I mostly use, and I'm going to call it my first cube because it's my first cube, and export it into that folder. Okay, you can see now if we go into the Meshes folder in our Unity project, my first cube is here, and if we wanted to use that in Unity later, you can see that I've imported it there, but it's come in at a very small scale. We'll look at how to fix that in a different tutorial. If, however, you want to save this project in Maya, you can save the scene as a Maya binary. I would not save it into the Assets folder though, because I don't want Unity to be reading these project files. I would save that, if I ever do save a Maya binary project file, I save them into this sort of root folder outside of the project structure. So I'll just save it here as my first project. So if you have a scene where you're working on multiple objects together, you can save them into the project like that. And just go continue. And that's that for now. Thank you for following my first tutorial. The next tutorial will be, we're going to make a simple dog or animal. I let you sort of make it up as you go along. And yeah, awesome. See you in the next video.